Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue to break down the Carolina Panthers. We just went through their upcoming season for 2024, and while obviously we're in the now, Panthers fans, I'm sure, are excited to at least watch some games to see if they can have some hope for the long term. But ultimately, I think even the most realistic Panthers fan would tell you it's not about this season. It's about, how does Bryce Young look and where is this team headed? And I think that that's something the Panthers are going to have to take into consideration for the next few years, as they signed Dave Canales, who is a younger head coach who hasn't had a ton of responsibilities up to this point. Yes, he's still been on a coaching staff and everything since 2009, but only 1 year as the offensive coordinator. Before that was a quarterbacks coach, passing game director. So Canales has a lot of learning to do himself as well. But the idea is that, especially coming off of 2 seasons, one in Tampa Bay, one in Seattle, where he's helped out some former, first round. I think Geno Smith was a first round pick back in the day, but helping out a couple former first round picks and having them, turn in career seasons. I mean, that's definitely a win. Geno was a second rounder. That's right. But either way, some reclamation projects a little bit, and ultimately, that's kind of what the Panthers are hoping for. Now they have a much more, a player that's still coming up that hasn't been discarded yet in Bryce Young, and they're going to try and maximize his potential in these next couple years. But they give Canales a 6-year deal, understanding that this is not a 1-2 season process, that this is going to take some time, and also that at the same time as well, the roster, along with Bryce Young alone, I mean, it just needs to sort of take a lot of steps in the right direction to be able to look like a fully functioning group once again. And obviously, not having their first round pick this past year really hurt them. They're getting back on track in the 2025 draft, and that is sort of where the eyes are on. It's kind of a loser mentality to some degree to be rooting for your team to lose games for better draft positioning. But you know what? I'm a Patriots fan, and I 100% was doing that last season as well, because I knew the season was just lost. And at that point especially, the Patriots had no direction. The Panthers at least should have an idea of what they can be with Bryce Young and Dave Canales in charge of the group. But it's about building up the personnel around Bryce Young, which is why just in the last segment I talked about, do I think that Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt are going to be good contracts for them long term? Probably not. I think that, Robert Hunt, Damian Lewis, both fine players, but don't think you're ever really going to get, Pro Bowl, All-Pro level production. I'd be shocked if we end up seeing either one of them turning into an All-Pro, but they're still both fine as well. And honestly, fine is an upgrade over what the Panthers had last season. Having some stability, knowing that, both of their deals were at least 4 seasons. The idea is to have some consistency, some stability, and some chemistry as well. So it's a step in the right direction. They already have Ikem Ekwonu at left tackle, so hopefully he pans out for them. A top 10 selection a couple years ago. Now it sort of dives into, well, who is Bryce Young actually throwing to? And Deontay Johnson, the Panthers decided to make a deal sending defense for offense, because again, it's not about this season in particular, it's about the long-term vision. So they end up sending out a defensive player to get Deontay Johnson. Is he a bona fide wide receiver 1? No, but he's also going to be their best wide receiver on the roster, most likely this upcoming season. Now, Xavier Legette, who they ended up trading back up into at the end of the first round, they're hoping that he can maybe emerge for them as well. Time will tell there. It's not that their receiving core is terrible. I mean, it's definitely not good, But, you have Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, Jonathan Mingo, who had a really disappointing rookie season, but the Panthers felt high on coming into the year at least, and Xavier Legette as well. So, finding a true wide receiver is going to be a big part of it. And then Jonathan Brooks, who they ended up taking, I think he was in the 3rd round this past year, 2nd round pick actually. He's still just 21 years old. So the run game emerging for Carolina would be very positive. And I sort of want to spin that into the conversation of, we're looking at the 2025 draft. What's the strategy for the Panthers here? Because, I heard earlier today I was watching the Herd with Colin Cowherd, and he was talking about the idea of, well, the Patriots, should they just play Drake May this year to see what he has, and if they don't feel good about it, move on from him and draft Carson Beck if Carson Beck has a good season? I think definitively no on that one, that it's a little bit more of a wait and see. But media outlets are going to start to throw around the idea, probably similar, about Bryce Young. Is it just time to press the reset button there? Because that's how that's how we have these conversations in football. But, ideally that's not the case. Ideally, Bryce Young can continue to develop, and the Panthers can simultaneously put pieces around him so that when he's full go, that the rest of the offense around him is not a liability. And that's why I think the 2025 draft is going to be very important for the Panthers to try and capitalize on, and make sure that they actually are able to sort of protect Bryce Young from, opposing teams and sort of his own developmental track. I think the biggest thing for him is getting an offensive line in front of him. Bryce Young, the very clear criticism of him is that he's too small. And definitely looked that way on the field sometimes, but we have seen short quarterbacks be able to have some success in the NFL. It's not going to happen if they're running for their lives and they have, 6'5" defensive linemen smothered in their face every single play. And this is supposed to be a pretty good offensive tackle class. There's the couple guys from LSU, Will Campbell being the star out of the group, but you have another one as well out of LSU in Emory Jones Jr. Those are the names I'm most familiar with, but I know there are some other people as well. Kelvin Banks Jr. out of Texas is supposed to be one of the top guys, and I think that offensive tackle is probably where the Panthers need to go most with their pick next year. There are other wide receivers as well that could definitely be interesting for them. Luther Burden, I believe his name is, for Missouri. He's somebody who is definitely going to be, at least an NFL caliber talent that I would be interested in as well. Just trying to picture of how this Panthers team is going to long-term build around Bryce Young. What are their needs? I think offensive line, like I mentioned, that's kind of the top priority for me. I know it's not the sexiest way to talk football, but I think winning in the trenches is going to be massively important for the Panthers, developing a run game to help take some of it off of Bryce Young while their receivers, again, it's not a horrible receiver group, but it's definitely not a good one. So I would say offensive line and receivers, sort of no duh. Those are the obvious choices, but at the same time, you look at how things have gone for the Panthers in recent years. They've been, somewhat a lot more willing to be spending their draft capital on defensive players. They got so aggressive with Bryce Young that I kind of feel like that's where all their attention needs to turn right now, because you give up DJ Moore, what ends up to be the pick that was used to draft Caleb Williams this past year. There was a lot of investment into Bryce Young. Now, a couple ways you can go about it. I think that ultimately, now especially because I think they just cleaned house in terms of the front office as well and their general manager. If that's the case, there might not be that much of a tie to Bryce Young, but I guarantee you Tepper and that ownership group as well is really going to want to see some results with Bryce Young. So ultimately, I'm just really curious to see how this progresses. Bryce Young is somebody that I didn't love necessarily coming out of college, and I didn't see anything last year that encouraged me, but I also am just not ready to write him off yet either. It's been a very rocky start, and I think that, Bryce Young is almost skated by a little bit of avoiding criticism because everybody is unquestionably saying, yeah, the Panthers situation was awful. This is true. But eventually, we're going to need to see Bryce Young at least give us some hope and some vision that he can be the option, because I don't think anything he put out on the field last year was flashes. And, you look at a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who was very highly regarded coming out of college, and even still, a lot of people are not sold on him whatsoever, but it was the flashes of greatness, the fourth quarter comeback drives in 2022, the moments of brilliance at the brilliance is maybe a little bit aggressive, but Jaguars getting out to a really good start in 2023. Obviously, the second half performance in that Chargers playoff game, those moments are what sort of get the Jaguars to buy in long term. That's where Bryce Young needs to start. It's just show me a flash of what you are going to be, and I can get on board with the vision. And I think that's going to be very important in this second season. Again, don't mean to rush him along the way, but, there's a very clear physical flaw with him in terms of his height and his size. And moving forward, that's just the way that the NFL works. Again, especially as long as I'm not mistaken on the front office turnover, I don't know if there was anybody, in a key position that was, in terms of being the head general manager, that was in charge of making the trade to go and acquire Bryce Young. But let me know what direction you want the Panthers to go on in terms of the developmental path of Bryce Young. But we're going to be taking our final break of the show. When we come back on the other side, you're going to be switching gears to MLB a little bit, where we will be discussing the star pitcher in Paul Skeens, talking about player development and such, talking about whether or not the Pirates should consider shutting down Skeens for the remainder of the season. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.